Hey folks, Tim Newman with Soft Light Studios coming to you once again from Columbus, Ohio. Unfortunately, many of us are still under lockdown, but I think we're doing our socially responsible thing by staying that way. So, still bringing you content to try to keep you entertained and out of trouble, as it were. Tonight, we're going to take a look at building photo collages in Photoshop with a fun little project that I think you'll find interesting, and it will test your ability to play with layers and to work with selection tools and masks and some clipping masks, some stuff that sounds kind of complicated, but if you watch me walk through this, I think you'll find that it's a lot easier than it sounds, and it can be fun too. Here you go. As promised, we're about to create a photo collage in Photoshop. Now, unlike a lot of the training videos that I normally do, I have not worked through this project from beginning to end. Sure, I have an idea of how I want my collage to look. I even have a template of sorts that I'm going to use as the basis for my collages design. What I have not done is worked through this project from beginning to end in Photoshop. So what you're going to get to see me do is work through each of the individual Photoshop steps that this project requires. You're going to get to see all the mistakes that I make and all of the repairs to those mistakes. You're going to see any of the Photoshop issues that crop up and the ways that we get around those issues. Hopefully, in the end, you'll see a finished collage that you think looks pretty cool. If nothing else, hopefully this video serves as the inspiration point for other Photoshop collages, projects, and tasks that can keep you busy and occupied during our current coronavirus lockdown. Let's hop over into Photoshop and get started. Now, over in Photoshop, the first thing that we want to do is create a new blank document that's going to serve really as our final completed document when we're all done with this project. What I think we would like to do is I think we would like to make this document 20 inches in width and 16 inches in height. That makes it a perfect size for printing. Our 300 pixels per inch that we see here is perfect for printing. It's a great resolution for print output. If you have anything other than 300 pixels per inch here, for example, 96 pixels per inch or 132 pixels per inch, you definitely want to increase that size. Now, Rgb Color is the color mode that we always work in when we're working with photographic documents or we're getting to do photographic prints, so that is just fine. I tend to always like to work in 16-bit bit depth. It gives Photoshop the ability to store that many more colors. And remember, you can always downsample at export time for other bit depth requirements that you might have. Now, one of the things that I want to pick here for background contents is a transparent background. I think this is really important. In fact, later on in the project, I think you're going to see why having this transparent background serves us really well and serves as a really great starting point in this document. The last thing I want to do here is I want to stick with that ProPhoto Rgb color space, which is the working Rgb color space that I have specified in my Photoshop configuration. I know there's a lot of debates out there about color space, but the one thing I know is I can always downsample at export time to whatever color space is appropriate for the target for the file that I'm about to output. So I always work in the largest color space I can in Photoshop and downsample later. Just works really well for me. All right, let's go ahead and click on Create to create this document. So here you see it. Our document is up, and in fact, it does have a single layer in it. And as you can tell by looking at this checkerboard grid here, it's currently transparent. There's nothing in this document. Not exactly exciting yet, but at least a decent starting place. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Command-0 on the Mac, that's a Control-0 on Windows, just to make this a little bit bigger so it fills the current tabbed document space that's available for it. Now, because this is going to be a 16 by 20 and it's going to be a collage, I kind of like the idea of matting this when it's all done. And that's something I need to think about before I get too far into this project. Because in all reality, what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy a 16 by 20 frame. That's a frame size that's commonly available at places like Hobby Lobby and Michael's, etc. And those are the cheaper frames when you can buy them already pre-made like that, as compared to making something like a 17 by 21 and having to have it custom cut and assembled. You pay a lot more money if you can't buy that frame off the shelf. So if I'm going to frame it, I probably want to mat it. And when I do matting, I typically, with a 16 by 20, do about a 2-inch border around that. But for this particular one, I think I'm going to go with a skinnier border, and I want to lay that out in advance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to the View menu, and I'm going to pick a New Guide Layout. And you notice we've obviously got a guide layout here that we've used for something else previously. I don't need any of these columns, and I don't need any of these rows. I simply need margins around the outside of my document. And as I said, our mat's going to be 1.5 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and create a 1.5 inch margin down here. So there's 1.5 inches. Now, I need to copy that to all of the other sides of the picture, the left, bottom, and the right. The easiest thing to do is a Command-A on the Mac, a Control-A on Windows, and a Command-C on the Mac, a Control-C on Windows, and that copies in the contents of that field. As I tab over the next field, I can do a Command-V on the Mac. Don't hit it twice, though. And I can tab into the next one and do a Command-V again, and then tab in the last one and do a Command-V there. Now that's a Control-V for you Windows users. And you see I now have 1.5 inches in all of those margin locations without having to type it over and over and over again. Now would be the perfect time to talk about these guides that we have just created in this transparent background layer that we have here in Photoshop. I think, as you can quickly tell, the transparent background layer is making these guides really hard to see. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, well, you said create this document with this transparent background layer. I did, and there's a reason for it, and we'll get back to it. But real quickly, we're going to create a couple of background fills that we can use in a bunch of different ways as we go through this exercise. So let's take a look at doing that. So the first thing I'm going to do is come over here and hit this plus icon in the Layers Control panel. That gives me a new layer. I'm going to grab the paint bucket tool with the G key. There we go. There's my paint bucket. And I'm going to hit the D key to bring up my default colors in Photoshop, which is a black foreground and a white background. And I'm going to go ahead and click and fill that in with black. Now those guides are way easier to see. No problem there. We're going to create one more layer here. I'm going to hit the X key to switch foreground and background colors. You can see that now white is my active foreground color, and I'm going to fill in this new layer that I just created here yet again. So now my document, I'll crunch down my history panel here, is got 3 layers in it. It's got one that's transparent, one that's all black, and one that's all white. Now that we're going to definitely use these throughout the project, and I do this in a lot of my work just to help visualize guides and help visualize other elements, but I also know I can turn them on and off at will. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come down here to this layer 1. I'm going to double click, and I'm going to call it transparent background, because that's what it is. I'm going to double click here. This is going to be black background. Oops, put a little space in there so it's easier to read. Double click here. This is white background. So these are all my little background layers that I have here. And what I do in a lot of cases is I just select all of them. So I already had this layer selected. I hold down the Shift key and click this one on the bottom. You can see all 3 are active as denoted by their gray channel strips here. I'm going to click on this little folder icon here, and that's going to turn those into a group. I'm going to double click on this group name and call these backgrounds. So there we have it, a group of backgrounds that we can use throughout this document. Continuing on here, I'm going to add in another new layer here, and I'm not going to do anything with that yet. And you'll notice real quickly, if I turn this background group on and off, I go from a transparent document to a document that's got whatever fill is currently active. If I come down here and say, you know what, let's see the black for right now, we can do that. And then if I turn that group on and off, it's the black one that's showing up there. So I do this a lot in a lot of my documents just for that utility that it gives me there. And as we go further with this, you're going to see how this becomes handy in a number of places. Okay, so now we can see our guides better, but we need to think about them a little bit. The guides that we have created so far really lay out the size of the mat that's going to go over the top of this 16 by 20 print. If we sized our content exactly to those guides, we run the risk that they're not going to align properly in the frame. If you ever see the frame where the picture and the mat are cut exactly to the same width, the picture shifts a little bit, you get that little thin white line that shows through around the edge of the mat. And we don't want that. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to come down here. We're going to create another set of guides. We're going to go into View, New Guide Layout. And for this next set of guides, we want to make sure we do the following thing. One is we're going to turn off this button right here that says Clear Existing Guides. We don't want to lose those. We're going to keep them there. And then we're going to take our first margin here and make it 1.375 inches. So basically we're trimming off 1/8 of an inch here, giving ourselves a little safety margin. I've highlighted that. I'm going to do a Command C on the Mac, Control C on Windows. I tab over Command V or Control V, depending on whether Mac or Windows. And now you see we have a second set of guides around our picture here. And this gives us a set of guides that is the size of the mat. That would be the interior guides, and a set of guides that are going to be our print area. That's our exterior guides there. So I think that's a pretty good setup to help us get this thing laid out, contain the size we want it to be, and make sure that it's going to fit well underneath the mat. All right, now let's go get that collage template I was talking about. Now, if I do a Command Tab here on the Mac, that is going to take me over to a list of applications that are open. I'm going to pop over here to the browser next. And I am on spark.adobe.com here. And if you have Creative Cloud subscription, you get the spark.adobe.com feature with it. And there's all sorts of projects in here that you can search for and find. And one of the things that I found in here was this collage that I like. I think I kind of like this layout that's in this collage. And I want to take this layout and use it in my own collage here. So I'm just going to click on Download. And it's going to say, how do I want this? I think I'll take it as a PNG file. That's fine. I'm going to go ahead and start download. And in a second, it'll be over here locally on my computer. If I right click or click down here on the little download button, you can see I have that file right here. I'll say show it in Finder. And there it is, the mypost.png file. That's the one that I just picked. I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to say open this up in Adobe Photoshop 2020, which is the one that's currently open. Now, it doesn't have an embedded color profile with it, and it's saying what do we want this to be profiled with, and I'm going to go ahead and assign it to Adobe Rgb 1998. That's about the safest default profile to find. And then I've got this checkbox right here turned on that says go ahead and convert it to my working RGB color space, which is that ProPhoto RGB. So as this document's coming in, it's going to attach a profile to it, that Adobe Rgb 1998, and then it's going to go ahead and convert it into my working profile space, ProPhoto RGB. So there you go. There is my collage that I want to use as the basis for my design. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to simply come over here to the layer strip that's got this collage on it. We are going to click and drag it across the screen. You can see it's following me. And I'm coming up here to my other tab, my Untitled tab, because that's where I want to drop this document into. And I'm just going to drag it down here to the middle. If we hold down the Shift key before we let go with the mouse, that will force this to go into the center of the screen. It is giving us a little warning about, hey, it's got a different depth than the source document. Might be different resolution, different size, not sure, but it wants us to know about that. I'm going to say, yep, go ahead and proceed. It's not perfect size-wise, but we're just using it as a guide for how we want this to lay out as we're building this collage. So you can see we now have it over here as an extra layer, layer 2. I'm going to just double click on that layer 2 and I'm going to call this collage guide. Now we may or may not keep that, and really I don't actually need that layer 1 after all. That can go away. So quick mistake there, but It's gone. So let's make sure that Collage Guide is active. I'm going to hit the V key to bring up the Move tool. And I've got the two-sided, or I should say four-sided icon here active, so I know that's the Move tool. If I hit it again, that's the Artboard tool. There's the difference. I just want to make sure I got the right tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this out so it snaps to that outer set of guides in the upper right up there. And then I'm just going to grab this lower left corner. I'm going to start dragging this out. And you notice, or you may not notice it because you're just watching this, but I can only drag it out in a aspect ratio locked manner. In other words, it's respecting the aspect ratio that it came in, and if I size it to this edge over here, well, it doesn't size the bottom edge to where I want it to be, and if I size to the bottom edge, then it goes over that edge. Considering I'm just using this as a guide, I don't really care about kind of stretching that aspect ratio out a little bit. So I am going to hold down the Shift key, which releases the aspect ratio lock. Now you can see that I got a lot more flexibility there. And I'm going to take this until it snaps to that lower left outside set of guides. And I'm going to let go of the mouse first, and I'm going to let go of the Shift key second. So that's now sized to that outer set of guides, and I think that could make a pretty cool collage. That could make a pretty cool collage with a mat around it. Now you notice we still have transform handles active. That means we need to hit Enter to commit that change. So now that size has been put into Photoshop, and that is currently sized out exactly the way we want it to be. At this point, it's probably good to stop and make a couple of observations here that I think will help us to understand the structure of the document so far. One is if we turn off the backgrounds group here, you can see that in fact this collage guide layer that we have here doesn't fill the whole layer. It's just going to the exterior guides as we stretched it out to do, and there's some transparency around it on this layer. Also, we don't really need the guides anymore. We might use them later for some other tasks, but at the moment, visually, they're kind of in the way. So on the Mac, a Command semicolon, on Windows, a Control semicolon, and those guides are now out of there. Now what we want to do is where it says follow me and let's explore, and there's those white dividing lines between all the pictures, we'd like to take that area and kind of turn it into a frame that we can reuse in Photoshop to fill in different ways. Maybe we'd like to fill it in with different colors, or we'd like to put a gradient in there, what have you. But I think that's the next thing I want to have happen here, is I want to be able to do that. So I'm going to take you through a couple steps to make that work. All right. So I'm going to grab the magic wand tool. That's the W key. And if I keep hitting the W key, you can see I cycle through all the tools, but that's the magic wand tool that we have there. Now, there's some things that we want to have happen here. We definitely want anti-alias on this. Gives us smoother transitions via grayscale selection/masks in non-vertical or non-horizontal areas. So if we're doing a diagonal or a curve, those make for a better selection. Contiguous is basically like the contiguous United States versus the 50 United States. Anything that we select, as that selection grows with the magic wand tool, it has to physically be touching the first area that we selected, or there has to be some connection there. So if you think about selecting the United States, if contiguous on and I clicked on somewhere in the center of the United States, I'd get 48 of the states, but I wouldn't get Alaska or Hawaii. If I turned contiguous off, then I click there, I would get Alaska and Hawaii as well. So I think that's a pretty good example for us. And I definitely want sample all layers turned off. We don't want to sample through any additional layers. We just want to sample the layer that's got this collage guide on it. So I'm going to click right here in that white space. That turned out pretty good selection-wise. There are two pieces to it that I don't have that I want to add into it to make myself a pretty nice frame here. One is the text that didn't get included with the magic wand tool. And it makes sense because that text is significantly far away in terms of hue, saturation, and luminance from the original white selection being black, so it didn't get included. And then I'd like to have that exterior transparency included in my selection as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now switch to the rectangular marquee tool, and I just hit the M key, and you can see up here right away the rectangular marquee tool is active. If you don't get that, you get the elliptical or some of the other ones, just keep hitting M until that rectangular marquee tool is active. Now we have an active selection, and we want to add to that selection. We don't want to wipe that selection out, so if I just clicked here without doing anything, that selection would go away. However, if I hold down the Shift key, see I get the little plus symbol below the selection, and I'm going to start drawing here. Now, once I've started drawing, I don't have to continue to hold that Shift key down. It'll stay in that additive selection mode, but I'm just drawing a marquee around the Follow Me and Let's Explore text. And once I get to the end of that, I'm going to let go, and you'll notice, hey, that whole area is now a part of the selection. So now the other thing I want is I want this transparent frame that's around the outside of the white frame that we have selected so far. I think we got a pretty cool selection going on here, and there's a couple of things that are probably worth pointing out at this point. One is you've just noticed that we can combine selection tools together. We just use the magic wand tool to select that interior frame. That's a rather complex selection. It's got some vertical components to it, some horizontal components to it, and we made that really easy. With just one click, it got everything but the text. Then by switching to the marquee tool and holding down that Shift key, which gives us the plus modifier, we're able to say keep what you already have and add in what's ever in this rectangle that we're about to draw. Now we're going to extend that concept one step further here by adding in one more selection, and when we do this, we're going to go back to the magic wand tool and use that to add in the third part of this selection. So this is a real great example of combining all these different selection tools together to very easily come up with a complex selection. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so magic wand tool, the W key, there we go. Before I click, I need to make sure I hold down that Shift key again. I don't want to lose my existing selection here. I want to add to it. So there's the Shift key. You can see the plus. And I'm just going to click out here in this transparent area. And look at that. It added all of that transparent area to the existing selection that we already had. So we've got a really complex selection here. We've got all of the white border elements between the pictures. We've got the text area. We managed to add that into the selection, and we've got the outside area of this picture, the transparency area, added as well. So pretty cool way of making a very cool selection here. Now there's a couple of things we could do at this point. One is we could take this selected area and we could fill in and draw on it if we wanted to, but quite frankly, that's probably the bad way to do it. The best way to do it is to think of this as the precursor to creating a layer mask. Now, I don't know what we're going to put on this layer yet, but what we're going to do is we're just going to come down here and we are going to click on Add Layer Mask, which effectively blocked out everything that's on this layer. But we're going to take that and reload it and reuse it in just a second, and I think you'll think this part's pretty cool. Okay. I know what you're thinking now, or at least I think I know what you're thinking now. And what I think you're thinking is, what the hell happened to my picture? A minute ago, I had a picture, and I had this really cool complex selection that I got with just 3 mouse clicks, and well, that was like way cool. And then I clicked on this little Add Layer Mask icon, and boom, my picture's gone, and my selection's gone, and I've got this funny little black and white symbol over here. Well, the wheels just fell off. Well, no, they really didn't. Now, you might technically say, hey, this is a mistake, but I often work this way because this is a really cool mechanism for taking a selection and saving it as a mask for later reuse. And I want to step through that process with you and then take you on to the next steps that we're going to work through here. So let's take a look at that. So if you notice here on this collage guide layer, we have this little black and white icon here. That's our selection turned into a mask. And what that selection is doing is it's saying, hey, anywhere where this mask is white, let that area show through. Anywhere where this mask is black, cover that up. All right, and we'll get into the two-dimensional aspect of that in a little bit because it also works its way downwards as well, which is an interesting concept. But that's the interaction from the contents on the layer to the mask that's associated with that layer. Now, if you notice as I'm hovering over this mask icon in the Collage Guide layer. If I hold down the Command key on the Mac or the Control key on Windows, I get that little white square with the black dots working its way around it. And what that tells me is if I click here right now, that's going to reload the selection from that layer mask and make it active again. So that's cool. We just got our selection back with one click. Now at this point, I can reuse that selection. In fact, I can turn it into another layer mask. And that's as simple as clicking on the plus icon down here at the bottom of the layers control panel. There's a new mask, then there's a new layer, and then come over here and click on add layer mask, and that layer mask is created again. You can see it up here in layer 1. And now that we have that layer mask up here, we really don't need it down in the Collage Guide layer anymore. There's one of two things we could do. We could either right click on this and we could delete the layer mask, or we could hold down the shift key and click on it, and that disables that layer mask on that layer, and voila, our photographs are back, which is kind of cool. So now we've got our photos showing here, and we've got this empty layer up here with this mask sitting here waiting to be used. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on the word layer 1, and I'm going to call this Collage Frame. May not make any sense at the moment, but in about 15 seconds it will. Now I'm going to hit the G key to bring up the paint bucket, and I'm confirming that the paint bucket tool is active. And then I'm going to come down here and click on the foreground color picker, and I'm going to say, you know, I'd really like this to have this kind of light green color as the frame around this collage. So I'm going to hold down the Option key on the Mac, Alt key on Windows, click right there, and you can see we've kind of got a greenish color picked there. I don't really like that green color, so I'm going to hold down that Option Alt key again and kind of click around up here and get me a little bit lighter green color there. I kind of like that one better, not quite so army green. So I'm going to click on OK. Paint bucket is still active. Click anywhere in the middle of the document. Boom. Now you got a color frame around every one of those pictures. Now if you look over here at the collage frame layer, you can see that in fact, looking at the layer contents, it's all green. The whole thing has been filled with that color. And where we're getting this blocked out for the pictures to show through is from this mask. So remember, the white contents of the mask allow whatever on this layer to show through, so we're seeing that, and the black contents block that, so we're not seeing the green there, and allow what's underneath to show through coming upwards. So that's that two-dimensional interaction I was telling you about just a second ago. But here's what's really cool about this. This is completely reusable. So if I decide, I don't like that green color, let's come back over here to the color picker and let's sample a little bit of this light orange with that Command key on the Mac, Alt key on Windows, and make that our color. Then Paint Bucket tool still active. Let's click there. New color in that layer. So I can immediately recolor the picture just about any way I want with a single click of a mouse. In fact, I could come over here and I could copy this layer and make all sorts of different collage frame colors and pick from the ones that I want. Just turn on the one that I want at that particular moment in time. So there we go. We've got our collage guide in, and we built our collage frame. So we got a couple of things done here. Now, time to start thinking about our next steps. Okay, the next thing we're going to think about here may, from your point of view, be a little bit out of order, but I feel like it's the appropriate next thing to do. If you see ears peeking up here periodically, there you go. That's Aspen. Normally she's running the switcher, but little thunder and lightning, and she's decided that switching duties are not for her. She's going to come hang out with the executive producer, sucking up a little bit. Makes sense. So we're going to take a look at how the mat is going to interact with this project, and we're going to put that mat layer on top so we can see it in place and see what we think of how it looks. So let's go ahead and jump into working on that now. Okay, so the easiest thing to do to start off with, remember we had our guides out here? So I'm going to do this Command semicolon on the Mac, that's Control semicolon on Windows. Our guides are back, and if you recall, our interior guides are the mat, and our exterior guides are the size of the picture. So that's what we need to do. We need to build ourselves a layer that has the matte on it. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab the rectangular marquee tool. Could use the M key to click on that. And I am going to grab the interior frame here and make a marquee selection out of that. And a couple of different ways to do this. Unlike how we built the collage frame, I'm actually just going to use this as a static selection and just fill that selection in. So right now you have to ask yourself what's selected. Well, what's selected is the interior of those marching ants, and what we really want for the matte is the exterior of those marching ants, or we want to invert that selection. And if we come up here to select in the menu, you can see that select inverse would do that for you. That, by the way, is a Shift Command I on the Mac or a Shift Control I on Windows. Now you see the marching ants on the outside. That gives us what's going to be the area that is our matte. Now, we don't want to fill this in right here because it would fill in right on top of our collage frame, and we don't want that. So what we're going to do is come over here and create a new layer with our plus icon. That gives us a new empty layer up here. And I'm going to hit D just to reload the default colors over here, and I'm going to hit X to flip them around. So now white is my foreground color, and then just the G key to bring up the paint bucket tool. So now if I paint, it just fills in that selected area, and that's what our matte's going to look like. Now ultimately you may decide, I don't like that matte with the frame for the collage. That's completely up to you. But now what you can see is there's the matte on or off, and there it is back on. So you can kind of see it both ways, and it kind of gives you some options as to what you might want to do there. Now, a couple things that I always do here. One is I double click on this and I call this matte layer, right? Because I don't want to forget what that is. The other thing I do here is I put a label on top of this. So I'm going to grab the text tool and I'm just going to come here and click somewhere. That's pretty big text, so let's size that down a little bit, maybe right around 60 points. And I'm going to say this is matte layer, right? Hyphen do not print. All right, there we go. And just going to click on another layer to deactivate that text layer, and then click back on it again. And then I'm going to hit the V key so I can take it and move it around. And you'll notice we get these smart guides here. It's a new feature in one of the last few releases of Photoshop. And wow, that's perfectly centered. And yeah, I think we'll just move it up a little bit there. It kind of centered on the matte and centered left to right. And that just reminds us, don't print this matte layer, right? And in fact, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the Shift key, grab the matte layer itself, hit the folder icon to build me a group, and I'm going to type the same thing in here, matte layer, or I'll actually say matte layers, right? Do not print, right? So we know when we're looking at this, oh, make sure we turn that off so we get that, right? So there's your choice there. And you can see that little safety overlap there that matte layer gives us. So I think that's pretty cool. I like that setup, and that kind of gives me some things to think about as I'm working forward here. One of the reasons I really love putting documents together this way and building the mat that goes around it and building the frame that's going to go around the content is it really gives me this ability to preview how things are going to look. And what I think here right now is this mat over the top of this kind of orangish looking collage frame doesn't really do it for me. So I'm going to make this collage frame layer active again. I'm going to grab that paint bucket tool, and I can see I've already got white as my active foreground color. Let's just recolor that collage layer. That's going to look a lot better as a white frame underneath that white mat. Now, I could go with the orangish frame around the picture and find an orangish matte, no problem. There's a gazillion matte colors out there. But I think the point to be made here is this really gives you some preview capabilities without spending the money on the print and on the matte. You can kind of see ahead of time, wow, those colors don't look good together, or I don't like that layout, and this gives you the flexibility to change it on the fly. Next thing we're going to do here is we're going to go back to concentrating on building our collage. I think we got a pretty good layout so far. We've got our matte visible up here, which we don't need now but we can always turn it back on at will. We've got our collage frame here, which we know we can repaint at will. And then we've got our collage guide here, which is great, but it's a bunch of pictures that aren't ours. And that's the next thing we need to work on, is what's going to be the easiest way to bring pictures in here and size them up and make them fit into those squares in a very controlled fashion and end up with the final collage we want to end up with. So that's what we're going to work on next. Time to get rid of the images that are in this collage guide and make a layout that makes this collage our very own. Now, before we start into this selection, I will freely tell you that there are a lot of different ways to do this. Some people choose to do this with vector shapes. Some people choose to do this using masks. And some people do this the way we're about to do it, which is to use painted areas on multiple layers and clip the images to those painted areas. Now, I'm not going to tell you which one I think is best. I think that the way that we're looking at it tonight makes the most sense in the overall scope of the tutorial as we've looked at it so far. So that's the way we're going to go forward with it, and we are going to go forward with it right now. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go up here to this collage frame, and we're going to come to the layer mask that's on there. We're going to hold down that Command key on the Mac, Control key on Windows, and we're going to click right on that mask icon, and you can see that we now have our mask reloaded as a selection. And if we think back to the way this mask was made originally, the selection that's currently active right now is the white frame between the pictures and what was originally the transparent border around that original collage guide. That's not what we want. We want the actual interior, each of those pictures. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up here and we're going to do a select inverse. And remember, Shift Command I on the Mac or Shift Control I on Windows for your shortcut keys. And now our selection is just those 5 picture frames. Before we do anything else, we want a new blank layer. So we're going to click on the plus symbol here to give us a new layer, and there we have it. There's a blank layer for us to work with. Now, what I would like to do is I would like to fill all these squares in with a color. Doesn't matter what color it is, but I can tell you that we probably don't want to use white, and we probably don't want to use black, because we've got white for the border and the frame and for one of the background layers, and the same thing with black. It's one of the background layers. We want something that's really obvious and sticks out. So the paint bucket tool is still active. We're just going to go over here and click on the foreground color selection tool, and I'm going to go with the really bright, obnoxious green. And then I'm going to use the paint bucket tool anywhere on here. And you'll notice that all of those squares are filled in with green. And this is not a masking situation now, because if we look at the layer icon over here, these are 5 individual green squares, which is really exactly what we need. Now, we need to get rid of this selection. So we're going to do a Command D, and that selection is now gone. Now, in order for this to work, we have to have 5 individual layers with 5 separate green squares on it to work with. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to come over here and click on the layer 1 label, and we're going to say this is picture 01. Okay? Now, at the moment, that's a little bit confusing, but we're going to copy this layer 4 more times, because we're going to have a total of 5 pictures to work with. And that's going to be on the Mac, a Command J 4 times. If you're on Windows, that's going to be a Control J 4 times. Okay? So now we've got 5 copies of those 5 green squares out there, 5 different layers. Now what we want to do is we want to start to get rid of some of the squares that we don't need. The easiest way to do this is just to use the magic wand tool to go through and select the squares that we don't want and knock them off of each layer. Okay? Now, you can see by virtue of using this copy command, we've got some confusing labels over here. We're going to straighten this out pretty quickly. Okay? Now, because this is already labeled picture 01, I'm going to drag this layer up here to the top. And when I think of picture 01, I think it's going to be the picture that's in this location here. And I want to get rid of the rest of these squares. Now what I want to do is I'm going to turn off these other 4 layers. So they're there, but they're not visible. And then I'm going to come up here and start working my way through the process of how I delete these. So like I said, W for the magic wand tool. And we want to make sure that we have the following settings turned on. We don't really care about anti-alias. We kind of leave that on all the time anyways, but these squares are all vertical and horizontal edges, so anti-alias doesn't really make any difference. Can't hurt, but not going to have an effect. And we definitely want contiguous on because we want to go through and very carefully select what we're going to delete. So what we want to do is get rid of these 4 green squares and leave this one. Well, you notice if I click here, it just activates all of the contents inside that green square. And if I hold down, you probably remember this, the shift key, I can add in this one. And if I keep holding down the shift key, I can add in the next 2. So I now have all 4 of those selected. If I hit the delete key, they're gone. And we are just seeing the one picture associated with the picture 01 square being covered up. Let's do a Command D to get rid of those selections. Let's turn off picture 01 and turn on our next layer down, which we're going to come in here and double click, and we're going to rename this picture 02. And picture 02 is going to be this picture right here. So we're going to use the wand tool to select this one, and then we're going to hold down that shift key and add in these 3 down here. We're going to hit delete, and now we've got picture 2 laid out for us. Let's do a Command or Control D to get rid of those selections. Let's turn this layer off. Let's go down here and turn the next layer down on. We're going to double click on the label and make this one picture 03. Again, we're going to think of this as picture 03, meaning that we need to delete these other 4 squares surrounding it. So again, W to select the first one and click on that, and then hold down the shift key and add in the next 4 squares. Hit delete key. There we go. We've got another one blocked out. Let's do a Command D on the Mac, Control D on Windows. Let's turn visibility for picture 3 layer off. We're now going to come down here to this layer. Again, I'm going to double click on that layer label, and I'm going to make this picture 4. Forgot to turn visibility on, no problem, I can turn it on now. You probably guessed it, right down here is picture 4, which means using the W key, we're going to click up here on this first one, we're going to hold down the shift key to turn on that plus modifier for the selection, going to select these 4 areas and hit delete, and now we have our block laid out for picture 4. We need to repeat this one more time. Command D or Control D to get rid of the active selections. Come down here, make this layer active, turn it on. Don't forget to turn off layer 4 or picture 4 above like I did. Double click here. Let's make this picture 5. There we go. Now, same thing. Use the W key for the wand tool. Select this one. Hold down your shift modifier to add in 3 more squares to that. Then delete those. And now you have your picture 5 layer all built. There we go. We have all of our regions built for all of our pictures on our collage. And we can turn all these back on now. We can just come down here, hold down the mouse, and drag across those. And there's all of our picture regions laid out. You know what's interesting at this point? We don't even need this collage guide anymore. We could really get rid of it. Now, I'm going to just leave it here for now, but I'm going to turn it off. So it's here, it's stored in the document, but we haven't gotten rid of it. All right. Now what we need to do is go get some pictures to put in here. And where we're going to go get these from is we're going to go here and do a File Open. I've got a folder out here on my desktop called Boat Images. And I am going to select all 5 of them. So I'm just holding down and do a Shift Range Select. And that's going to open all 5 of those boat images at once. I'm going to get profile messages on all of them. No problem. Just click on OK. Now I've got all 5 of them loaded up. Got a couple things here I can get rid of. Don't need this orange anymore. Don't need the original picture frame. So now I'm just down to these 5 boat pictures. Okay. Now, boat 1, kind of a nice landscape version here. I'm going to make that active by clicking on its tab. I'm coming over here to the layer strip, and I'm dragging it over to this untitled document. And I'm just going to hold down the Shift key and let go here in the middle. I get that warning about different size. That's fine. We'll live with it. And you can see that boat 1 is sitting back here between picture 04 and 05, because that's where I left off. Now, where I really want is, because this is a landscape picture, is for this to be associated with picture 5. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to put this on top of the picture 01 layer. That's the one that's going to fit in best. And then I am going to right click on this picture and I am going to say create clipping mask. That's going to clip that picture inside the colored region of the layer below it. And if I hold on the V key and turn on the move tool, you can see the transform frame for this picture. I'm just going to shrink this down until it fits nicely in there. You can see I can move it around. I don't even have to fit exactly in that frame. In fact, if I don't want to keep the aspect ratio, I can hold down the Shift key and I can just stretch that in there. That fits pretty good. I like that. If I'm happy with that, Enter key to keep that change. Now that's clipped in there to that frame. We'll do that another time. Come over here, let's grab boat 2. I think this would make a great picture too. All right. Again, I'm going to take this layer, I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to drag it over, and I'm just going to drop it off here in the middle. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. We realize it's different size. Now it's not in the right order, but no big deal. It needs to be associated with picture 2, right? So I'm going to drag it down so it's right above picture 2. And then I'm going to take it and I'm going to do that right click, create clipping mask to clip it into picture 2. Now you can see, looking at the guides, it's way big. So we're going to just zoom out a little bit there. I'm going to go ahead and resize this down quite a bit. And obviously it's a little big for this frame, but that's okay. Let's size it down a little further, maybe a little further here. And I think maybe just the red wheel is all I need in the middle of that picture frame. I can use my arrow keys to nudge this around a little bit. I kind of like that. Let's hit enter. That is now edited to fit inside that frame. I'm going to do one more here so you get the idea. Grab this one here from picture 3, grab the layer strip, drag it over to that untitled frame, drop it off anywhere in the center. Again, not in the right location, no big deal. Grab the layer strip, drag it down so it's sitting right on top of picture 3. Right click, create that clipping mask, and now hit the V key to bring up the move tool. Let's resize that picture and kind of adjust it and get it in here into this collage. Now I resized it down just a little bit too far. Maybe come back up here, kind of center the boat in the frame. I like that. There we go. Hit enter. Hit the A key to turn that off. I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to drop in the next 2 pictures. I think you get the idea of how to do this, and we'll be right back with a little more. All right, I've gone ahead and finished placing our last pictures into our document. I think you can see we got a pretty nice collage going here. I'm going to go ahead and do a Command 0 just to make this fit in the screen a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and do that Command semicolon or Control semicolon on Windows to get rid of those guides. And there's our collage. And you can see that each of these pictures over here is indeed tied as a clipping layer into the layer below it. So that's what controls framing those up and keeping them nice and uniform. One last thing we want to do here, I think just put that little text block in the middle with something that we want to say, and then we'll be pretty close to wrapping up. So I'm going to do that and we'll be right back. So grab the layer control panel over here. I need to make sure that my text is up here on the top. Maybe we want to put it right above layer 1 here. Just going to grab the text tool and just click somewhere here in the middle and say any day sailing is a good day. Right, exclamation point, just Command A. Definitely would like that text, I think, to be black in there. Looks to be a little bit on the large side there. That looks like it would fit in there pretty good. I'm just going to hit any other layer and then come back to this layer to take me out of editing mode, hit the V key for move, and then we're just going to center this up left to right, and you can see you've got nice margins here top to bottom. Show you one trick here real quickly that I think is pretty cool. I'm going to double click on the text icon in the text layer that activates the text. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to open up the character control panel, and right here we can change the kerning between the letters. I'm just going to double click here, use the up arrow key, and I'm just going to spread these letters out so it fits that space in there. Now, got to be careful because remember we got a little mat that could potentially be in there, but I think that's pretty good there. Again, click on another layer, come back. I think that's good. Let's hit the A key to deactivate the move tool, and let's turn our mat back on. Oh, that fits in there perfectly. Now remember, we don't want to print the mat, but here's what we want to print, and here's what it's going to look like if we use a mat. All right. Well, there you go. I think you get the idea. Real simple way to build this collage. I know it seems like a lot of steps, but the explanation is longer than the actual work. You could probably knock this out in about 10 minutes, give or take, if you got to be pretty proficient at it. So a couple more thoughts and then I'll have you out of here. So there you go. There's our tutorial, if you will, on putting together your own collage in Photoshop. And what's really neat about this collage, in addition to the fact that you can really customize the pictures and lay them out the way you want them, is now that all of this is built, you can at will change out any of those pictures in there you want with different pictures. So you can reuse this collage kind of as if it's a template over and over and over again, which is pretty cool. And you can go out and pick out any collage pattern you like. It doesn't even have to be rectangles and squares like I did. You could find ones that are circles or triangles or what have you, as long as you use the proper selection tools and build the masks and create those little picture regions in solid fill colors. Easy to do. And this clipping mask feature will work every time with that. So hope you enjoyed this. Hope this gives you some ideas and things to play with. Please stay inside. Please stay healthy. Please stay safe. Don't forget to click on that subscribe button because we'll have some more stuff to keep you entertained throughout the upcoming days while we're all working our way together through this crisis. Look forward to seeing you back here. Have a good night.